overhead view. Wow. Yes. I am not Chris Battistell. I'm Nate Markham. This is Fourth and Frames. Man, it feels like I'm coming back to my baby, my original pod that I was doing for so many years. And it's got this injection of youth with my co-host, Rhett Drew Scott. Week 2's over. Tonight, we're going to break down our Bussin, Disgussin, and mid players for week 3. We're going to hit our panic button players and ring the alarm and our frame it flex plays. Let's get it popping. As I said, I'm filling in for Chris Battistell. Chris's wife's birthday is today. Collective happy birthday from everybody at Fantasy and Frames for Mrs. Chris Battistell. And hopefully, I don't know how old she is in Canadian years, but I'm guessing probably 22, whatever. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure she is poutining it up with some wonderful drinks. But instead, I am steering this ship. And I couldn't ask for two better deckhands than YouTube. Drew, Rhett. Wow. Rhett.
Ooh.
I know. Great start, Nate. Great start. We're going to start over. Cut. Go to Q2. This isn't live, right?
No, you're good.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. All right. How you guys doing? What's up, man?
Doing wonderful, man.
Yeah. I think usually this is probably a little more symbiotic. You guys have a cohesiveness. It's together, unlike some people's body parts, unfortunately, as we bust into the injury news and some headlines. I know that's a terrible segue. It ain't good. But it wasn't a one, though. It is, man. It wasn't the best of week 2 news for the injury front. It's devastating each year. And I know I've been playing this crazy game for 20 plus years, and this might be one of the more injury riddled 2 weeks to start a season. Saquon Barkley. We saw he had an amazing game. Everything everybody was hoping for. Gets that ankle underneath him, sprained ankle. MRI revealed that it wasn't as major, so no high ankle injury. Minimum 3 weeks. What do you guys think outcome is, Drew?
In terms of like how much time he misses? Or
Yeah, forecast, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the coaching staff tried to sell it to us that he was going to play this week, which I don't think anybody really bought into. But he is kind of a superhuman. He doesn't really heal the same way the rest of us do. So my guess would be 2 to 3 weeks. But it wouldn't surprise me if he was back next week either. But because I think it's a conflict of interest because he's. The team wants him healthy because they have playoff aspirations, but he's on a 1-year deal and he needs to be out there as much as he can to be able to rack up the stats to hopefully get a nice contract. So, but at the same time, he also needs to be healthy to do that. So, we'll see how they play it, but I don't feel good about any of the guys that are going to be replacing him. I don't think it's a plug and play thing.
So, Rhett, in the next, we'll say 3 weeks. We'll assume that he is out 3 weeks. I don't want to make that assumption, but it is what it is. And you have Matt Breida, we'll say, is the number 1 option that New York decides to unleash. Over the next 3 weeks, how many RB2 weeks do you think Matt Breida can actually put together?
I mean,
0, 1?
He's still explosive, so you have to say maybe there's one of these weeks where he pops off a big run and he gets one of these RB2 weeks by proxy. Mm-hmm. Besides that, I mean, he's kind of shown over the years that he's a pretty fragile guy. Always one of these high promise guys in fantasy that people always he seems to get drafted every year, and it never really seems to pan out, even back to several years ago when he was one of these preseason hype guys. So, I mean, for me, I don't see much with Matt Breida. It'd be interesting to see how this is going to affect Daniel Jones's numbers because he already leads NFL quarterbacks in rushing through the first 2 weeks with 102 yards. So, I mean, it should be interesting to see what happens there. And there's some Eric Gray love there. So, who knows with that?
I think that at this point, when you go San Francisco, you have the Seahawks, the Dolphins, who aren't exactly, anything to write home about, but game script won't be in their favor. And then at Buffalo, if he actually does have to sit out through week 6, none of those matchups are anything that I would be extremely optimistic. Not, I don't want to say without Saquon or with Saquon, because that's a knock against Saquon, but I don't like any of those matchups. But yeah, Eric Gray talk. Yeah, it's a rough go for New York. I can't disagree. It's been a rough go through the first 2 weeks, or first couple of snaps for Deontay Johnson, one of my most rostered players. Drew, I think you knew that, considering how many times we all drafted. Rhett, maybe you probably knew that too, because I won't shut up about the guy. But if there was a way to shut me up, put him on IR. He's going to miss a minimum of 4 weeks. We'll talk about some of the impact of the other wide receivers later on in the show, of course. But I want to talk about Jalen Waddle. This is a pretty significant one, that if the concussion, if he doesn't clear, I mean, how high can Tyreek Hill go above wide receiver 1, Rhett?
I mean, wide receiver 1's pretty much the ceiling. If we're being obvious about it, I mean, wide receiver 1 is the ceiling. The interesting part is this for me. Without Jalen Waddle, how does that running game evolve? I mean, we've seen Mostert have a solid start to the season. I mean, do we see some more Devon Achane? Do we see Mostert go even higher? Does Durham Smythe, who randomly is getting so many snaps, get a little bit more love at the tight end position? I mean, there's some factors there. That Jalen Waddle cloth cuts much deeper than just Tyreek Hill. It's going to affect a lot of guys there, I think.
It really will. And the Durham Smythe love is always interesting, I guess. You want to talk about one injury that has ancillary effects all the way across the field? That's Joe Burrow. I mean, this calf aggravation was something that we were all a little concerned with. Not enough to take Jamar Chase out of the top 2 or 3 picks, but I think that there were people that were thinking that, man, T. Higgins, if Joe Burrow's not healthy, can he support 2? What's going to be the situation? Drew, who's the biggest loss? Is it Jamar Chase if Joe Burrow misses time or is hurt, or is it Joe Mixon possibly?
I think it is Jamar Chase because, like you mentioned, despite the preseason worries, we still drafted him very highly. And so there's a lot of draft capital with Jamar that comes along with Jamar Chase. So I think that has to be the biggest loss. And I've got him. I took him in one of my leagues at the number 2 overall pick, and my team's not off to the hottest start. And I am a little bit worried now. I don't want to panic sell or anything like that, but it's definitely going to be tough for his value for sure.
Yeah, if someone offered you Garrett Wilson and plus, would you take that in exchange for Jamar Chase?
I don't think I would. With the quarterback situation Garrett Wilson's dealing with, they're both like whoever plays in place of Joe Burrow, they're both just 2 really talented wide receivers that are dealing with crappy quarterback situation. So I would just, unless the plus was like really, really good, I'm not going to move off Jamar Chase. And usually the plus isn't as good as the first piece. So, and I think the plus would have to be even better than Garrett Wilson for me to make that trade. So I would just hold at that point.
Puka Nacua and Garrett Wilson for Jamar Chase. Tugging at that. Please. I know, man. I know. You got to know your audience. That's a good, you know what? You don't have to answer that. We'll just let that percolate and we'll move on so that I don't push over into the IDP show in about 55 minutes. Tune in. If
I think that might be why Hollywood's in the chat, is he's monitoring your hosting.
He's like, speed it up. I feel bad, Drew, because typically if I was smart, I would have left this next one directly for you. But I want to hear Rhett's take on our love child, Anthony Richardson, the concussion. Do you think this is the only thing that worries me? Will they try to ease back on him rushing the ball? And does that, obviously we know what hurts his fantasy value, but to what degree, Rhett? Where should we be with Anthony Richardson?
I mean, obviously, what was it? 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns last week before the injury.
2 of them.
Yeah, he was having himself a very nice game, but I will say this, I think he hits 3 for the year. So he's had a rushing touchdown in each of the first 2 weeks, which is huge for his fantasy value, but he also hasn't been that bad throwing the football. Like, he's actually been pretty good, better than we thought he was going to be. I mean, Michael Pittman has those 23 targets through 2 weeks. He's off to a great start. So in terms of them pulling back, obviously it does affect his fantasy value, because if he's going from 50 rushing yards to 25 a game, you're losing 2.5 points a game, and you're losing some of that touchdown potential there. But Yeah, it obviously does affect his value, and it affects his value significantly, but he's shown the ability to throw the ball. So I don't know, maybe he starts to flash some of that ability a little bit more. It might be a plus for some of these receivers, especially Michael Pittman. But there's still no real running back in that room. I know Zach Moss had a nice game, but until Taylor comes back or they figure out the Taylor situation, I mean, it's Richardson and a bunch of guys in that backfield. We got to be honest.
It is. A person who won't be in the backfield, and this is by no means, I know that it's, we have to talk about it, unfortunately. Nick Chubb, my RB1 on the season, probably my most rostered running back within the first group. Gruesome injury, that knee. We hope for the best of recoveries for him. Yeah. What does that mean for the remainder of that running back room? Obviously, we know they just signed
Kareem Hunt.
Holy moly, I'm trying to read Kareem Hunt. And I wanted to say Kenyon Drake, because Kenyon Drake just got signed somewhere too, which is not big news. So let's move on past that. But the real big question is going to be, at what point does Kareem Hunt step in? He obviously has familiarity with that offense, that he could step in sooner rather than later. I particularly am in the belief that he won't. It'll be a Jerome Ford week this week. But I mean, is there any optimism with this Cleveland running game whatsoever, or are we just going to have to bow our heads and, pour one out for old Chubb?
I mean, I'm going to pour one out for Nick Chubb, but I'm also going to say that if you stay tuned a little bit later on during our Bussin Disgussin midsection, I may have some Jerome Ford love to throw out there. So, I am optimistic about him. And I will say this in pertaining to Kareem Hunt. Over the offseason, and I saw Dave Kluge tweet this, or it might have been Dave Kluge, but over the offseason, the Cleveland Browns chose Jerome Ford over Kareem Hunt. So that should give us perhaps everything we need to know about this situation and where it's going to go. Do I think Kareem Hunt has a role in this offense? Absolutely, but I think this is more about what they don't think Pierre Strong can do versus what they don't think Jerome Ford can do.
Yeah, I also think that it was equal parts not wanting to pay Kareem Hunt the money that Kareem Hunt thought that he was worth. I think that's what 28, 29, 30 other teams felt the same way. So
yeah,
I'm not too overly optimistic that it's going to be this Kareem Hunt reemergence like he had back in Kansas City by any means. Odell Beckham Jr. suffered an ankle injury. Obviously, this is Drew. Rashad Bateman's going to be over under 1,000 yards this week.
Oh, over.
Perfect. Exactly. I was waiting for you to get your Rashad Bateman love out. We can move on to David Montgomery, who suffered a thigh injury and had to leave the game. Craig Reynolds came in and got the majority of the rushing attempts, a la David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think we've had conversation that maybe he could take some of those rushing attempts. I'm not as sold. Is Craig Reynolds worth a pickup for the deepest of leagues, Drew?
Yeah, I think he's worth a speculative ad. I probably wouldn't throw him out there, but just to see how it shakes out. It'd have to be in a pretty deep league for me to want to start him. But I definitely think he's worth a spot on the end of your bench if you're talking about like a six bench spot or 7 bench spot, something like that. I'd add him in there for sure.
You figure Atlanta, Green Bay, Carolina, Tampa is the next 4. David Montgomery's not going to be out that long, but Atlanta's not the worst matchup. I mean, it could be a game that could stay on the ground for certain. But here, you guys want to get to this trade offer right here. So he just got offered to give Flowers and Mike Williams to get Amon-Ra, redraft PPR. His running backs are CMC, Montgomery, Mostert, Roschon. His wide receivers are Calvin Ridley, Christian Watson, Mike Williams, Zay, Brandon Cooks, and Robert Woods. 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, 2 flex. Would you give Zay and Mike Williams for Amon-Ra?
Yes.
And a yes.
I don't know if we need a ton of analysis behind that or not, but yes, I would absolutely do that.
I would too. I think I always like to get the best player in a 2-for-1, especially if it's a little like Williams is volatile. Zay is I love Zay, and I like him more when Odell's not on the field. But it's there. So last but not least, Logan Thomas concussion. I know Cole Turner, Jorge for you. Maybe he gets more than the snaps. I think Jorge had him as the tight end like 12 last week. He could get there. Cam Akers, reemergence. Last but not least, traded to Minnesota. The Alexander Madison Truthers are now storming the palace. They're really upset that 3.2 yards per rush attempt is going to go to the wayside. And Cam Akers' 3.9 is going to come in and lead Minnesota nowhere. Drew, I know you probably are upset by me saying that.
No.
Any positives? Okay. Very good. Just checking. But guys, if anybody by chance is on Twitter or Facebook, move over to YouTube, ask some questions, get in the chat. Don't forget to follow us over at our little follow buttons there, and subscribe, please, if you haven't done so yet. That leads us to segment 1 of the week. This is Bussin, Disgussin, and Mid. And for you old folks like myself, those are 3 terms that describe people that are good, bad, and indifferent. It's pretty much easy as that.
So you're pretty hip.
I'm pretty hip.
Look at you.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Disgussin is a word spelled wrong, but it's basically disgusting is the right word. Bussin might not be a word, but whatever.
Well, it's absolutely a word.
Well, okay. Okay. We'll see. We're going to talk about some Bussin players of the week. These are guys that are outside the top 20 wide receiver, top 15 running backs, or the top 8 tight ends, top 12 quarterbacks as well. Guys that you aren't just plug and play in each week. Rhett, who is your Bussin player of the week?
I'm going to have to take a victory lap on here because I profiled him in the offseason. Baby, it's George Pickens time. Wide receiver 22 this week, according to fantasy data. His projections for the week over there, 4.5 catches, 63 yards, 13.07 PPR points for the week. That's all fine. That's all dandy, but this is where I think he overshoots that. Number one, we previously discussed it. Deontay Johnson is on IR, so he is pretty much that number 1 target by default in that offense. Number 2, ladies and gentlemen, he plays the Las Vegas Raiders this week, which is ranked 22nd in the league so far this season against wide receivers. Oh, baby. His week 2 A-dot, George Pickens, was 10.2 yards, which tells me something. In the past, he's very much last year was a field stretcher type. Basically, one of these guys we would say was great at best ball. That 10.2 A-dot last week tells me this much, is that he's getting ready to get used in a more traditional wide receiver 1 role, a guy who's going to be in that intermediate place a lot more. Therefore, that usage is going to go up, and he showed that with those 10 targets last week. Has 17 on the season for 8.5 targets per game. Like we mentioned, that 4 for 127, there was a 71-yard touchdown in there for a little point spike bonus. Like we said, those 10 targets led the Steelers. But even without the touchdown, he still averaged 18 yards per catch, 3 catches, 56 yards. So pretty good there. Not going to say it was elite. There was a 40% catch rate. But 10 targets, you have to chase the volume in fantasy football anytime you can. Like I previously said, he is that no-brainer, no question wide receiver 1 while Deontay is out for the next month. And it is an offense that doesn't really have many pass catchers that are going to scare you besides George Pickens. Calvin Austin, I mean, smallish guy, fast, hasn't done much with it. Allen Robinson, we've been down this road before. None of us are interested anymore. Pat Freiermuth, good tight end, but once again, tight end is a complete and utter wasteland. So we're not in for that action. So this week, I'm seeing a guy that can probably get another 10-target week. And he is always a threat for a big play. So if George Pickens gets another one of these big plays, let's say it's a 40-yard catch, and he gets 10 targets and he gets 5 catches. So we're probably looking at around a 5-catch, 90 yards, and he's always potential for a touchdown. In a PPR format or half PPR, you're looking at a guy who you're not starting being a very good possibility for a 12 to 15-point week. And if he pops off, another 20-point week. I know we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 33 last week in some format. So George Pickens, an excellent pick to be a guy, considering his current situation, to be bussing out the bag this week for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
He will be bussing if Kenny Pickett can not look so disgusting on his catchable target percentage. That 56.3% catchable targets needs to improve. I think one of the key factors that we saw this past week that I think can lead to that is the incorporation of Jaylen Warren into that offense, where his explosiveness hopefully not just in the receiving game, but in the running game as well, will lead to maybe some, I don't know, maybe some more time for Kenny Pickett. Maybe just Kenny Pickett has to evolve and continue to improve with some of those targets, because when given the ball, Pickens is discussing, but in the good way of discussing. So this is very confusing with people that don't know the words. I've now used discussing in both teams. It's like he's shit. We know. But let's get to one of these questions here. Super CMB challengers just got offered Kenny Skywalker and Debo for CD in a full point PPR.
This one's tough to answer without context in terms of like what the league size is, what your team needs are. Like, do you need the depth? Because if you do, and it's a deeper league, then I think it's a fair trade. I'll say that. Like, I do think that this is a balanced offer, but if I'm in a 10-team league, I'm keeping CD because I don't care near as much about depth as I would if I'm in like a 14 or a 16-team league. Mm-hmm. If I'm in a deeper league, then I might take the Ken Walker Debo. But if you feel good about where your roster's at, I would just, I agree with Jorge. I would just hold CD. But I do think that is a fair trade, though. I'm not the highest on Debo, but I do like what I've seen coming into the year.
I'd say contextually that I don't know this whatsoever, but typically when these offers like this come up on the precipice of injuries like to Nick Chubb, et cetera, I'm wondering if this is one of the Nick Chubb managers who now people are targeting with, hey, here's some running back depth that you can use and do so. And if that's the case, maybe I consider a little bit more. But man, I really hate being in that situation where I lose. We got some clarity, so it's a 10-man. So I'm keeping CD as well.
Keeping CD,
because the depth is there. But yeah, and those situations like that, and those come up all the time. You lose one of your RB1s, and then someone wants to take your wide receiver one and give you some depth, and that crushes me. I turn it down just because I don't want to lose my first 2 draft picks, regardless of how much it may actually help me. So
right.
Georgie Edwards wants to know thoughts on Tutu Atwell's role, fantasy relevance as the season progresses with or without Cooper Kupp.
Rhett, why don't you go first? Give us the non-homer take.
All right, I'm going to say this. I've had extensive conversations in home leagues about whether Tutu Atwell is viable in the long run. And the way we've kind of broken it down is that in my opinion, in these first 2 weeks, Puka has stepped into the Cooper Kupp target share. Tutu has stepped into that Robert Woods sort of role that he had over the years where he was a solid number 2. If Cooper Kupp comes back and if he's healthy, and that's a big if, you have to wonder about the long-term viability of Tutu in that situation. But if without Kupp, I think Tutu's a solid season-long play. He's finally showing that ability that got him drafted in the 2nd round despite his size a couple years ago. With a healthy Kupp, I think he's probably going to be a drop at some point in your season because I think Puka has just shown too much in the first 2 weeks of the season to be the odd man out in that situation.
Gotcha. Nice. And we appreciate you, Super CMB Challengers, for tuning in. Obviously, if you have any more questions, let them roll, or send them over to the DMs of either of these 2 guys. They'll be able to help answer any of those as the season progresses. All right, Drew, we're talking some Bussin now. Who is?
Oh, it's my turn.
You can go, Drew. Yeah, I'll let you go.
All right.
I
forgot we were doing. We've had such great questions tonight. I forgot we were even. I forgot why we were even here.
This goes along with one of the questions that was from earlier. A one player mentioned, which is who?
I know, and I told him that he shouldn't, or that he should trade this guy away. But in week 3, I like Zay Flowers quite a bit. He is my Bussin player for this week. So far, 2 weeks into his rookie season, he's the wide receiver 31 and half PPR. Had a pretty solid week 1, a so-so week 2. He comes in as the wide receiver 29 in the Fantasy Pros week 3 expert consensus rankings. And so that's where whenever we talk about a guy has to be inside or outside the top 12 or whatever the case may be to meet this criteria, that's the rankings that we're using, just for a little bit more context. So shout out to everyone that contributes to that, as does our own Nate Markham here. Thank you for your service to help round out these consensus rankings for us. But I've got him as wide receiver 24, so a little bit ahead of that consensus for week 3. His opponent this week, they're the Indianapolis Colts. So far through 2 weeks, they've given up the 2nd most points to the wide receiver position. And on top of that, the Ravens receivers have accounted for 69% of targets. Nice. Which is the 7th highest number across the league. So I'm sure it helps, just for some more context, that the Ravens rarely target the running back position. And then on top of that, Mark Andrews missed week 1. So that the number of targets the wide receiver position has gotten through 2 weeks is probably a little inflated compared to what it'll be season long. But through 2 weeks, Zay Flowers has accounted for just over 27% of the Ravens' targets. OBJ, he had a minor ankle injury pop up during week 2. He's expected to be okay. Rashad Bateman, he's still playing less than 60% of snaps as he tries to work his way back from the injury. Hopefully, the snaps climb from week 1 to week 2. You guys know I love Bateman, but I'm riding with a different Ravens receiver this week. I think that if there's someone that's going to benefit from the juicy matchup that they have with the Colts secondary, it's going to be Zay Flowers. So he is my Bussin player for week 3. You're still muted, Nate.
I appreciate that. As I searched for a different page to back up your Bussin call, I found that something that can be quote unquote discussing for the Ravens is their offensive line is losing or has lost 2 of their starters, Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Linbaum. And that means the pressure. They did a really good job against Cincinnati. And I don't like Indianapolis's pass rush all that well. So I think it's going to give him plenty of time to find his open man. And that's what Zay Flowers has done really well too. With an 8 out of 6.0, I know that can be increasing, but that's 21.8% of the total air yard share. So when they stretch the field, and I'm not worried about that running game in Baltimore at all, especially behind that weak offensive line, I think Zay Flowers is in for a really, really good week as well. And, it could probably apply to multiple of the guys across the board, at least for Baltimore. So my Bussin, I'm going to give the credit to our fearless leader, Chris Battistell. His pick, and I'm going to basically just reinforce it. It's a running back who I was extremely out on going into the season because people that have ligaments missing from their body typically aren't people that I want to rely on. But this man is bionic. He has returned faster than anybody expected. And he's done so with improvements each week. That's one Javonte Williams, Denver Broncos running back. I mean, here's a guy that has an even snap share percentage with Samaje through 2 games, but he's out-touched him 31-17. Last week, we thought a lot of the hype was going to be towards Pirine. We saw Javonte really carry the load. I mean, Samaje Pirine had one carry last week and a 34% target per route run compared to Samaje's 18%. So everything is leaning towards Javonte's involvement, not only in the passing game, but in the running game, or not only in the running game, but in the passing game, whichever one you want to see value in. Obviously, we know passing targets carry more value than rushing attempts, but when you combine the two, I'm starting to become more in. Through the 2 games, 4 missed tackles forced. Mediocre, but as the increased role and the trust in that knee grows, so does some of the elusiveness that usually follow. He has looked great. He has good burst. He can get through the line. I mean, the game plan was favored for him against Washington when they were up, but they didn't give him the ball at the end. And I think that's a coaching staff gaffe that they're going to realize. They relied on Russ too much. I think they're going to lighten the load a little bit, especially in this game against Miami. I think, running backs against Miami are averaging 135.5 on 26 attempts, 1.5 touchdowns, 5 receptions, 30 yards, 3rd most points allowed to the position on the year. They need to slow down Miami's passing attack. Run the ball. Or as Chris said, run the damn ball. Denver's 0-2. Putting the ball in Wilson's hands, way too much for liability. Russell Wilson's shown that when you have a better running game, as he gets acclimated with this passing game, especially with the healthier Jerry Jeudy, he should do more with that. So feed the man, let him get going. He has a projection, 14 carries, 95 yards for 21.5 PPR points. If that's the case, that's an RB1 right there this week, which would be Bussin. Did I do that right?
You nailed it. You absolutely nailed it.
I know. I'm really good at that. What's not really good are some of our discussing plays of the week, which are guys inside the top 35 at wide receiver, the top 20 at running back, the top 12 at tight ends, and top 20 at QBs. Drew, who's discussing?
You just talked about him there briefly whenever you were talking about Javonte. He just barely snuck into the consensus rankings inside the top 35 at receiver. wide receiver 33, I believe, if I remember correctly. It's Jerry Jeudy with the Denver Broncos. And now this is only his second week coming back off of injury. Week 2, he made his season debut against the Washington Commanders. He played 68% of snaps, which is more snaps than I thought that he would play, to be honest, but put up 3 receptions for 25 yards on 5 targets. And he's just inside that top 35. I've got him outside of it at wide receiver 37. So it's not a humongous gap. I just think we should temper expectations. I know, like Gator, a lot of us are very excited that he's back. I am also one of those people. I was very high on Jerry Jeudy this offseason before he got injured. And I expect a lot of good things for Jerry Jeudy a little bit later down the year. Like the good news is he was the first read on 33% of the team's targets last week, which was the highest among receivers on the Broncos. So he should be a solid fantasy option once he's back to being an every down player and he has a better matchup. We need to, calm it a little bit this week. He only put up 4 fantasy points against a defense that's given up the 7th most points to the wide receiver position through the first 2 weeks. And now he gets to play against the Miami Dolphins, who you just talked about. You can beat them on the ground, but they've given the 4th lowest amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position through 2 weeks. So that was despite the fact that one of those 2 weeks they had to play against the Chargers. So this isn't just a thing where they had 2 cake matchups the first 2 weeks, so their numbers look good. It hasn't been an easy road. So I like Jerry Jeudy long term. I think that there could be a potential, if things happen in week 3 the way that I think they will, I think there could be a potential buy low window where, a Jerry Jeudy manager, he had to wait for him to come back. He missed week 1, didn't really have much in week 2. I don't think there's going to be a lot in week 3. But as those snaps come up, as he gets a more favorable matchup, I do think Jerry Jeudy will be a very valuable fantasy asset down the road. So if things shake out the way I think they will, this could possibly open up a buy window. So just keep an eye on that. But temper your expectations if you got him in your lineup this week.
And never trust a man with 2 first names, especially when one of them is a woman's name. That's disgusting.
Oh, man.
Sorry, but that needed to be said. Rhett. Oh, actually, I think we have a question real quick. Dawson Alexander Madison going forward. I don't want anything to do with Madison. They brought Cam Akers in for a reason. Madison was paid as an RB2, not an RB2 in fantasy, but an RB2 on the team. And that's what's going to probably happen. I think maybe they got duped into thinking that Cam Akers is going to be the Cam Akers from week 14 on from last year. I just don't see that happen. Does anybody disagree with that take?
No, I didn't like Madison coming into the year. I was much lower the consensus on him in draft season. And he's done nothing for me to feel like I was wrong in that aspect. So now that they decided to bring in another running back, albeit they didn't have to give up a ton of draft capital, they still went out and grabbed another running back whenever they could have just not done that. So I think that there's something there to that. And Cam Akers is reuniting with his former offensive coordinator, and now the Vikings' current offensive coordinator was also on the Rams staff whenever Kevin O'Connell was there as the offensive coordinator as well. So there's some familiarity there. I think there's something there to where he's at least going to cut into Madison's work, and Madison already wasn't producing with the volume he was getting. And that was kind of the selling point that most people with Madison, I think that was kind of their calling card, was who's going to take touches away from him. And you don't even really have that going for you anymore. So I'm out on Madison.
Who are you out on this week? Who's discussing, Rhett?
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Dallas Goedert of Philadelphia Eagles. Fantasy Pros expert consensus ranking, tight end 6 for this week. Fantasy data projects him for 4 catches for 45 yards and 10.24 PPR fantasy points. Guys, I don't see it, especially after Dallas put up a silky 6 catches for 22 yards last week, which was a low-end tight end 2 finish. They get Tampa this week, but what I'm going to give you is not a matchup-based analogy at all. Philadelphia is very clearly trying to establish themselves as a running team this year. We saw DeAndre Swift, of all people, go for 178 last week. And to top that off, Jalen Hurts is not processing and passing the ball at that 2022 level that he was last year. He's not at that MVP type level throwing the ball this year. And when they do throw the ball, this is very clearly through 2 weeks, a Devonte Smith, AJ Brown passing offense. So to top off the Jalen Hurts passing, he's only averaging 28 pass attempts per game through these first 2 weeks. He's been efficient and completed 40 of them, but he is tied for 21st with 6.5 yards per attempt, which tells me they are not pushing the ball downfield, which tells me a lot about the fact that Jalen Hurts maybe doesn't have that level of trust. Maybe they're trying to run. Maybe teams are catching up to the RPO scheme. I don't know what that is, why that's the case, but there is something going on there that is causing Jalen to be less efficient. So it's hard to see where the Dallas Goedert volume is whenever they're consolidating around AJ and Javonte and running the ball more. So for me, with a team that is trending so run heavy, and Dallas Goedert really, if you're looking at the numbers, has had one really, really good season. And outside of that, hasn't really been a high target guy, the tight end position. I mean, I don't like to call it tight end 6 this week. I think we're closer to that tight end 2, low end tight end 2 situation once again. So out on Dallas Goedert for the week. Disgussin, no doubt.
Yeah, it's hard, man. There's the passing, the whole offense looks rough. I think this acclimation to a non-Shane Steichen ran offense, Jalen doesn't. I mean, a lot of the pieces look discombobulated, and Dallas Goedert is not seeing any, I think, quality reps that can lead to anything after the catch. That's why you're seeing those, 4 for 20 and 6 for 20, which is probably what you'll see. You guys want to do a KTC, a keep trade cut?
Ooh, let's do it.
I beat Gator to the punch on the old clickers. See these fast fingers. I'm spry at my 44 years old. All right, give me
rookie
Drew
edition.
Yeah, Drew, give me your cut.
So I mean, I'm assuming this is redraft, since we are a redraft show, even though it's all rookies. Can I answer the whole thing? Because I don't know how to not do it without adding more context to it. Can I just give mine and see if you guys disagree?
Go for it.
All right. So I'm going to trade Zay Flowers, who I just talked about, because I feel like of these three, he probably has the most hype. People are more hot and bothered about Zay Flowers than they are any of these three. So I think you probably get the biggest return for him at this point. I'm going to keep Jordan Addison because Kirk Cousins is throwing the ball a shit ton, and he still hasn't even taken over KJ Osborne yet in terms of snaps, which will happen. It is inevitable. It is going to happen. He will be the wide receiver 2 in this offense. And so I think Addison's role is only going to continue to grow. And this pains me to even say this because JSN, from a dynasty perspective, coming into this, he was my wide receiver 1 in this class, and I still feel that way. But in redraft, if I have to cut one of these three guys, I think you can't trade him because he doesn't have the trade value that Zay Flowers or Addison does right now. So I guess I'm cutting JSN. So do you guys disagree? Would you go a different route?
Rhett?
I would go that exact same route, but I will say there is sneaky JSN trade value because in Warrior Bowl earlier this week, I had a guy offer me, he showed interest in JSN, and I was able to move JSN and $15 a fab and get Nico Collins back in return.
And $13 a fab. I love those trades.
Which we figured out is basically 1/6 the value of what Jerome Ford is worth in week 3 of fab somehow.
Absolutely not, because I put $100 up for fab in him somewhere, and I did not get Jerome Ford.
Yeah, that's crazy. So thoughts on adding Justin Watson? The thing with that, you can't. As much as I love I like Justin Watson a lot, but when Mahomes is throwing to 11 different receivers every game, there's no safe floor. You're shooting for ceiling, and if you're doing that, you're gonna get burned more times than not. And it's not a worthwhile investment. I'd keep Charbonnet if you drop Justice Hill. Justice Hill has a little bit of a toe injury right now, so it's probably all systems go for Gus Edwards. But I would keep Charbonnet. He's a Kenneth Walker injury away from being a true RB 1.5, we'll say. So that's my take on that. Unless you guys disagree.
No, I'm with you on that.
I don't disagree at all.
And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but Ford be the main guy? What do you think the separation? What do you think the dispersion of carries will be, Rhett, between Ford and Kareem Hunt
this week or going forward?
I would say going forward.
Probably 60-40 Ford, if I had to guess, because that's kind of what it was. Chubb got more of the work last year, and Hunt got more of the pass work. Yeah. So I wouldn't be shocked if that's what they go with at all, where Hunt's the 2-down guy. Ford is the 2-down guy, and then Hunt comes in and gets that pass work. I wouldn't be shocked with that situation at all.
And I wouldn't be shocked if Ford actually eats some of the passing work too. He's shown that he is more than capable as a receiving back too. So Jorge wants to know, would you start Puka over the following: Calvin Ridley, AJ Brown, Debo, or CD? I would start him over Debo for sure. Probably not over any of the other three, even though it's hard to, say no to what he's done so far.
Yeah, I agree. I'd start him over Debo. It does get a little more complicated if Brandon Ayuk doesn't play. He got banged up this past week. If there's no Brandon Ayuk, that makes it closer. But yeah, I'm not starting him over Ridley, Brown, or CD, but I would start him over Debo.
Randy wants to know, in a 12-team PPR where he starts one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, a flex, and a tight end. He's got T-Law, ETN, Brees, Jerome Ford, Chuba, Tank, Kendry Miller, Amon-Ra with Turf Toe, AJ Brown, Jahan Dotson, Zay Flowers, Elijah Moore, Dallas Goedert. He got offered Calvin Ridley and Kenneth Walker for Amon-Ra and ETN. He's really concerned about Amon-Ra's injury. The more I look into it, didn't practice today, plus JMO comes back. At the end of the day, I'm going to say one thing. If you don't feel comfortable about it, I don't know if there's enough that anybody should tell you, unless someone says it's asinine. Trust your gut sometimes and go with what you would feel comfortable doing. That being said, with you two, do you think the return for Calvin Ridley and Kenneth Walker for those two is enough where you would feel comfortable if your prognosis for his turf toe isn't as bad as it would appear?
I'll approach it this way. And I so far, I think Calvin Ridley has been the best player in that Jacksonville offense. I know Christian Kirk had a big week last week, but I think Calvin Ridley is going to end up being pretty much the primary receiver in that offense. There's the Tank Bigsby thing that is coming, that is lurking over Travis Etienne's shoulder. Whether it happens or not, we're not sure, but it's there to give you a little bit, at least a little sliver of doubt. Sure. So I would say this is that I would lean right now. I just like the Amon-Ra and Etienne side a little bit more, pending Amon-Ra's health, of course.
Fair enough. Drew, Dalton Kincaid, Taysom Hill.
Oh, God.
Is it as easy as Dalton Kincaid without question?
It is for me, yeah.
Same here.
It's a fair question because Taysom, just, you never know what kind of weird usage he's going to get on a week-to-week basis. But no, I'm not playing him over Dalton Kincaid.
And looking into our crystal ball, does anybody have any players to add before the week 4 waiver push? I know the depth of the league is obviously important. I think someone like, Roshan is an interesting person who might not have the push right now. I think I don't want to say add, but I think there's some trade players out there that you could be of value. Hey, keeping me, trading Jorge and cutting Gator. Now we're talking, Hollywood. Hollywood Titan, my IDP co-host, coming up in about 20 minutes. But yeah, I think maybe trading for Josh Jacobs isn't a terrible idea. I think I don't know.
I got one. I got one that I like. I think it might not be a bad idea to stash Devon Chain.
Yeah, that's
because Salvin Ahmed isn't practicing. A-Chain just made his first start last week. He's a rookie. He's going to come along a little bit slower, and he's been dealing with injuries of his own. And I don't ever think he'll be a workhorse for the Dolphins. But I mean, it's the guys in front of him. Like Jeff Wilson's going to be coming off IR at some point. Who knows when that is? Raheem Mostert, we know his history. So I think Devon A-Chain wasn't a guy I really liked a lot during the draft process, but he landed in the perfect spot. The speed of the Dolphins, the speed that he can bring, I don't think there was a team that could have fit him better. And so if there's a guy that maybe we don't see having maybe somebody we didn't expect to have a big role in week 3 that ends up doing so, if there's no Ahmed and it's just Raheem Mostert and Devon A-Chain there in the backfield, maybe he makes a couple plays and earns himself a bigger role.
God, it is the most Kyle Shanahan backfield ever put together by a non-Kyle Shanahan.
Well, Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson were literally Kyle Shanahan's running backs before they were.
But then you add in Devon A-Chain, and it's like you have all these one-cut guys. It's like you have 2 49ers, then you have a guy that Kyle Shanahan probably would have drafted if he would have had the chance. So I mean, it's hilarious. I mean, and I agree with you. it's hard to forecast that backfield on a week-to-week basis, but I could see a place where A-Chain does possibly come up guy down the road.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that when you're tied to an offense like that, the upside, the floor is just even more elevated, and the ceiling can be just immense. I don't know what the floor ceiling is for Kendre Miller this week as a flex play.
I'm excited.
I'm
much more excited than I should be.
I don't disagree, because I can't say I have much excitement for Tony Jones, even though what we've seen. He had the true. Trying to think of a good comparison as far as the Jerome Bettis is the comparison I heard this morning line. Basically 20 yards on 6 carries for 3 touchdowns, and that's not what I expect, but that's the the ha of it all.
It's a LeGarrette Blount stat line.
There you go. LeGarrette Blount's a great one too. Perfect. Who was the guy for the Eagles? Just
also
year.
LeGarrette Blount.
Well,
last year. Sorry.
2 years ago, actually. Irrelevant.
But like the Packers, they've given up the 6th most fantasy points to the running back position so far through 2 weeks. That's Chicago in week 1, Atlanta in week 2. So they're giving up points on the ground. It's going to be Kendre Miller and Tony Jones Jr. from all indications. I mean, we know we're not having Kamara because of the suspension. It sounds like Jamal Williams isn't going to play. And so I think it's going to be risky putting him in there because he hasn't played. He's coming back from injury. He hasn't played yet. We have no idea what the snap share is going to look like. But
yeah. And
one thing I am willing to say, and with a lot of confidence, is that he is a more talented running back than Tony Jones Jr. So
have you seen him run in the NFL yet?
I don't really know if I need to, because I've seen Tony Jones run in the NFL.
Yes, exactly. No, you're totally fine. Who we've seen in the NFL run so far is Dameon Pierce. Draco wants to know, is he a good player to buy low? I say yes to an extent. I'm concerned with one thing. I don't know if their team is going to put them in a position where he has a full the complement of snaps that we need for him to be productive, because it's been Devin Singletary when they're trailing, and I worry about that. I think that you might not have to spend much, but it's careful navigating when you get through there.
Yeah, it's always a value thing, because you don't know what the person's asking for. So first of all, shout out for the Jonesy Fortnite profile picture for your YouTube thing there. I appreciate that. Second thing is, Jonesy is one of the main characters in the Fortnite storyline. But if we make it to the Ring the Bell segment, we're going to talk about Dameon Pierce. And so I don't want to give away too much. So, Draco, just hang out with us for a minute, and we'll get there. But I would be nervous to buy on him, is what I'll say.
Gotcha. And what we were talking about before, and this kind of goes with that too, is a little bit of maybe some players that are discussing. And one of the guys that Chris had, I would 100% agree with. And it's not a knock against him. Green Bay faithful, don't come knocking on my door. But Jordan Love in week 3 has all the makings of being Disgussin. I mean, here's a guy that's averaging 3 touchdowns per game through the first 2 weeks. Quarterback 1. On only 57 dropbacks. He's thrown the ball 52 times on those dropbacks too. So the passing volume just really isn't there necessarily for what I would want to see as a comfortable, consistent floor on a regression. I think it's a regressive tendency with those numbers being the way it is, especially when you complete 56% of your passes, and yet this unsustainable 11.7% touchdown percentage. 11.7%, mind you, is about 4.5% higher than the next closest person. That screams regression. And it's regression if you go against the right defense. Who's this defensive matchup this week? It's the New Orleans Saints, the second stingiest defense against opposing quarterbacks, allowing an average of 175.5 passing yards, completion percentage of 56%, which lines really accurately with what he's done on the season. And without those touchdowns to support that, you're talking about a QB, a mid QB 2, realistically. And so that one touchdown was thrown with a minute left in the game against the Panthers. He has 3 interceptions. The Saints just have a really good defense. Very underrated, if you ask me. And I mean, talk about 48 pressures, 30 hurry-ups, 9 sacks. Carl Granderson, it's the list goes on. I don't want to start talking about defense because I can get into that, but Cam Jordan, then we leave, which would have been a great segue into the IDP show coming up in about 10 minutes. But here's his projection: 180 yards, half a touchdown, 1.5 interceptions. That's a QB3 if those projections come true. Yeah, that's pretty ugly right there. So let's go from the ugly to the just kind of mid. It's getting late in the day. It's getting late at the bar. Now you're just kind of closing up. You're looking around and you're like, man, Bussin's out the door. That sucks. Disgussin's right here. I don't want that. We'll go with mid. We'll start with the mids to take home as the show concludes. I'll start with my mid. Tell you what, look real good at the beginning of the season. Those beer goggles are starting to kick in just a little bit as the season progresses, but maybe it's just for this week. That's Ramondre Stevenson. I love Ramondre, but I do have some concerns, especially this week. I mean, 72% snap share. That's really good. We're not going to get 90% snap shares out of running backs. You're just not going to see that. I don't think Zeke's been as involved as people had assumed. Also doesn't hurt. They haven't had that many goal line carries from what I have watched, which might, misleading at times, but they've been playing from behind every game. It's been very weird. 112 total snaps, yet only 27 rush attempts, 2.8 yards per attempt. He is RB2 in routes run. 12 routes run on, out wide puts him as the RB1 in that category. But Chris's most interesting find that was all of his 9 targets came from out of the backfield. I don't know if that's as interesting if he was just a decoy when he was out wide. But here's the week 3 matchup. It's the New York Jets. He's never scored against the Jets. The Jets are decent against the run. Anytime you have Quinn Williams in the middle, it's nasty. Pass catching running backs have been doing well. So 6.2 yards per reception, 11 targets, 9 receptions, 56 yards. So I think even if the running game doesn't get going, I think there's a good chance that he does through the air. I think this leads to he doesn't have a prediction. I will say somewhere around 11 carries, 6 receptions, 100 total yards, and a score puts him as that maybe that borderline RB1, low end, high end RB2. I hope I did Chris justice with those stats. We shall see. Drew, who is your mid?
I can't believe I'm doing this to myself. I really can't. But I like his. I like Baker Mayfield as a streaming option this week. Right now,
nice.
According to Week 3 Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings, he's the quarterback 25. I've got him up at quarterback 17. And believe it or not, through 2 weeks, he's the quarterback 14. And in Week 3, he gets a matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, who they've given up the most fantasy points to the quarterback position so far this season. They've been really tough against the run. You don't want to start your running backs against them, but quarterbacks, receivers, so far through 2 weeks, they've been a go against the Philadelphia Eagles. And that the 2 quarterbacks they face so far are Mac Jones and Kirk Cousins. And so, not exactly who's who among quarterbacks, but not bad either. But the reality is whenever you have Mike Evans playing as well as he is right now, you've got Chris Godwin, you've got Trey Palmer, Rashad White, you've got Chris's guy, Kate Otten, to throw to. They're going to make life easier on their quarterback. So far this year, he's top 12 in adjusted completion percentage, and he's top 10 in accurate throw percentage. And he leads the league in completion rate under pressure. So he really hasn't been that bad. Like, he's had a pretty solid start to the year, a lot better than I thought it was going to be. So the thing that blew my mind, and maybe we should have cared a little bit more, The Buccaneers' new offensive coordinator was the Seahawks quarterback coach last year, which I'm sure had something to do with the resurgence that we saw from Geno Smith. And now he comes over, he's the offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers, and then here's Baker Mayfield doing what he's doing. Look, that guy might be on the short list. He went quarterback coach, OC, a head coaching job might not be too far away with what he's doing with these quarterbacks the last couple of years. But regardless of all that, I'm in on Baker as a streamer this week. I think you can do a lot worse if you are in the streaming quarterback market. You need somebody for this week. Even after the start he's been on, he's probably still out there on waivers. I think you can pick him up and expect a mid performance, which is something you can expect. You would hope for from a streamer if you're picking up somebody like Baker Mayfield. So go grab Baker.
I never thought I would agree with that, and yet I'm. You make good points. I mean, as Gator said, those are facts, and at this point, you can get rid of all preconceived notions when you go into the season and it's going against. This was at this point last year, probably where, like you said, with Geno, people didn't want to keep believing it. And each week there was another person saying, is this the week we believe? Is this the week we believe? And then before you know it, they said that 17 weeks in a row, and no one ever believed until it was too late and you had no chance at either streaming them or picking them up. So weird that we're comparing Baker to Geno, and that's a positive. But yeah,
what a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive. Let's go to Rolling Loud's question here. He's waited really long, or she's waited really long. And they did this. They traded CMC and Puka for AJ Brown, Josh Jacobs. I'm gonna say that's Brian. Oh yeah, Junior. So Brian Robinson. Because if that was Bijan, Drew, you didn't have to talk. You'd have
cancel it.
But no, he would have gotten Bijan. So he traded CMC and Puka for those guys. So CMC and Puka, he gets AJ Brown, Josh Jacobs, Brian Robinson Jr. So his lineup now is Jalen Hurts, Brian Robinson, Josh Jacobs, Jalen Waddle, Tyler Lockett, TJ Hawkinson. Wish that was Randy Moss, but Zach Moss, unfortunately. And Tua as second flex. He lost Chubb and Dobbins. So, yeah, it's sacrificial lamb. You give up CMC. Like we were talking about earlier, man, when you lose Chubb, man, you had Chubb and CMC. Oh, my God. Oh, I would have been so happy with that team. Oh, that would have hurt. But, go ahead, guys. What do you think? I mean, there's a lot of pieces to take. Overall, does his lineup get better by the depth pieces that he added?
Go ahead, Rhett.
Oh, it's hard for me to say because, I mean, you're losing the running back one on the
101.
You're losing the 101, and you're losing the guy who is he the wide receiver one in fantasy so far this year? If not, he's real close to it.
Yeah, right now.
So as of now, you're losing two top 5 players at their position, maybe top 3 players at their position to get back AJ Brown, who had one okay week and one bad week. Josh Jacobs, who is going to get volume, and Brian Robinson Jr., who seems to have the chokehold. I mean, for me, I get the sacrificial lamb thing you have going on there, but you gave up 2 really good pieces for 2 pretty good pieces and Brian Robinson Jr., who has been above average so far. So if you need the depth, I get it, but it's just really hard for me to wrap my head around losing 2 guys that have been that good so early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think Puka will naturally he's going to lose value at some point once Kupp comes back. We don't know for sure if that's going to be week 5 or if it's going to be later in the year, but I do think Kupp's going to come back and it will hurt. Puka and Kupp, there's a preconceived notion that's a little bit inaccurate that Puka and Kupp play the same role because Puka he's lined up in the slot less than 30% of the time. So he's not in the Cooper Kupp role. He's just getting the Cooper Kupp volume. And so that is going. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. He is playing. He is almost a carbon copy of Robert Woods whenever he was in Los Angeles. And so like I do still think even whenever Kupp comes back, Puka will have value still, but it obviously won't be what it is right now. But I also think that AJ Brown and Josh Jacobs are 2 of the best buy low options in redraft right now because of their slow starts. And so, and if we get to the ringing the alarm portion, we're going to talk about Josh Jacobs. I've got some stuff for him as well. So I don't hate the trade. It sucks because it's CMC, and right now with CMC played 100% of snaps last week.
Yeah,
he right now he is the 101 for redraft purposes if he's getting that type of usage. And Kyle Shanahan came out and said, "Oh, we don't want that to be the case." Yada yada. Like, dude, you're literally the one calling plays. You're the one making these decisions. If you don't want that to be the case, you literally just have to not make it happen, and you chose to let it happen. So, the giving up CMC hurts me a lot more than Puka, obviously, but AJ Brown, Josh Jacobs, I think that they're 2 great buy low options. Brian Robinson's a guy that I might be entertaining selling high on, but nonetheless, he should give you good volume. So I get why you did what you did because losing Chubb and Dobbins, that's painful because they both look like they were going to crush this year based off what they did before they got hurt. So I get it. I don't blame you for making that deal at all.
Right.
I think it's pretty fair value, and you got guys that I think will perform much better for the rest of the year than they have through the first 2 weeks.
If that trade is a man, I'm not. Not 100% behind it, but I'm also not going to say that come season's in that you don't win that trade. How about this next trade, which from Ventro wants to know, would you trade away Zay Flowers for D-Hop? His other two wide receivers are Tyler Lockett and Javonte Smith. So
I think it's almost like a flip a coin type of thing. Like I think that's pretty. I think they're pretty fair in value. I think they're pretty close across the board. It's just which one do you like more? I mean, I think that Hopkins probably has more guaranteed volume coming his way.
Yeah,
but it's going to be from a quarterback that isn't near as talented as the one that Zay Flowers has throwing him the ball. They're both probably going to play similar roles for their offenses because Hopkins isn't going to be exactly stretching the field anymore either. So,
Rhett, choose one.
God, look, he's hit the nail on the head. And my instinct says that, but I was high on Zay coming into the year, and I wasn't sure how much Hopkins had left in the tank. So my pure bias says Zay, but the logic says D-Hop because, like we said, there's going to be more consistent volume there. So
gotcha.
Flip a coin.
Well, let's flip the script a little bit and jump into ringing the alarm.
Pick up Devon Chain if you're going to pick up one of the two. Quentin Johnson.
Sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah,
Quentin Johnson played like 20% of snaps, I think, if that, this past week. Like I'm surprised. I didn't think it was going to take this long for him to overtake Josh Palmer as the wide receiver 3, but it has. I mean, Josh Palmer is very comfortably the wide receiver 3. So if you're going to drop Justice Hill for one of them, yeah, I talked about HM being a guy, somebody like Crystal Ball looking into week 4 possibly. If you're gonna do it for him. But I don't think you have to drop Justice Hill. But I like Gus Edwards more than Justice Hill anyway. So
no, I do too. I'm right there with you. So that takes us to I think I don't know if it's gonna be the final segment. Who knows? We might keep it rolling, but I think
it probably needs to be.
We'll keep it short and sweet. This is the ring the alarm segment. What we're gonna do is gonna take a look at a player who last week had a bad week or multiple weeks. And I want both of you to kind of a lightning round of ringing the alarm or canceling that alert and saying, don't worry, throw some water on that fire if there will be. Let's start in midway. Quarterback Justin Fields, obviously, it has been, I mean, it can't get much worse. The read and recognition looks terrible. The offensive line looks terrible again as a result of him holding on to the ball. I mean, what's the season output? Or should we be concerned? Or is there still QB1 upside? We've seen that immense talent. Are we ringing the alarm? Are we canceling this alert? What do you guys think?
I'll go ahead and take this. I'm going to say ring the alarm for now. But that quote that he dropped today about just saying F it and playing his game is freaking fascinating. If he comes out this week and he has a 100-yard rushing game, then he's back and they're going to have to see the error of their ways. So if he comes out and that's what he's talking about doing this week, and I know he tried to walk it back. You can't walk it back, baby. Let's play that F it ball, but let's ring the alarm for now because this pocket stuff hasn't looked good on him these first 2 weeks.
This is by far not the week that you want to go into it because, and this isn't the homer in me, Kansas City Chiefs defense is bordering on, I hate to use the word elite, but they're really, really good. Yeah. Anybody that thinks that they're just, what they've been in the past, they're dangerous. I mean, they have speed across all linebacking fronts. The front four is getting push and their secondary is really coming along. I'm ringing the bell again, but after this week, maybe that could be a buy low for Justin Fields. No doubt. Let's move along to another running back who I think many people had high hopes for. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, this is Dameon Pierce. We talked about him earlier. Houston, CJ Stroud looks really good. He looks a lot better because they're trailing, and Dameon Pierce isn't really the win trailing running back. It's been Devin Singletary. But guys, I mean, should we ring the alarm or should we just say, all right, this is still Dameon Pierce?
If you listen to the AFC South preview that we did on this show this offseason and you heard my bust pick for the Houston Texans, then you already know you should have been ringing the alarm. I tried to tell y'all he wasn't going to return that top 15 running back ADP that he was going at during draft season. And now this is season long, but through 2 weeks, it's not looking good for you guys that disagree with me. He's been the running back 44, but I do want to say this. It's not all his fault. He is 35th amongst running backs in yards before contact per carry, which is more of an offensive line stat than a running back stat. His offensive line has not been good. And on top of that, they haven't been healthy. I think that they had like 4 of their 5 offensive linemen in week 2 that were like the starting offensive linemen that were injured, that were out at some point or out for the game. So this isn't all on Dameon Pierce. But even injuries aside, he had a 48.6 snap share in week 2, which is the lowest snap share since the first game of his career. Week 1 is rookie season. That is the lowest snap share he's had. And with the low amount of total touchdowns the Texans are going to score on a weekly basis, and Dameon Pierce only running a route on 35% of dropbacks so far this year. So whenever they fall behind, as you said, Nate, he hasn't been that guy. I would be worried if you're invested in Dameon Pierce as a top 15 running back during draft season. It's somebody that I am absolutely concerned about. And it's not all his fault, but nonetheless, you have to be concerned.
Yeah. And, when we go from one running back that there should be concern, I think that Josh Jacobs last week, the rushing attack, if you want to call it that, was, I don't think there's anybody. And I heard someone else mention this, that has there ever been a yardage leader ever have negative yardage in a game going forward after that? I can't imagine there has been. It's just a weird outlier stat. But his usage in the receiving game, for me, makes me cancel the alert just because I think the volume will be there, and I think I know who he is as a running back. Maybe the 370 touch plateau might have hurt just a little bit. But what do you guys think? Am I being a little optimistic, or is there reason for pessimism?
No, I agree with you. And I said earlier in that trade that was talking about Josh Jacobs that I think he's a great buy opportunity right now. I mean, through 2 weeks, he's gotten 85% of the Raiders rushing attempts and almost 20% target share and 90% of the running back targets for Las Vegas. It's the old Najee Harris argument that he's just simply getting the volume. And then over the next several weeks, he's got the Steelers who've given up the most fantasy points to the running back position over the first 2 weeks. He's got the Chargers who've given up the 13th most, the Packers who've given up the 6th most, and the Patriots who've given up the 10th most, and then the Bears who've given up the 5th most. So like his schedule's about to lighten up based on what teams have done against the running back position over the last couple weeks. So I think that Josh Jacobs, I think right now is the time to try to go buy him and cash in on that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what it's going to take to acquire for people looking to buy, because you have to have the right opportunity and situation. But I'm definitely looking to acquire if possible. Unless you're listening to this and you play in a league with me, then I'm definitely not, because I think he's a bum. He's washed up. But I don't think anybody listens to me anyway. So we'll take it for what it's worth. We'll see. Yay or nay, guys? Thumbs up. We framing it, or should we kick it over to shoot the gap?
Let's let you guys cook over on the DFF side, or on the defensive side. I know that we have JJ in the chat. He's ready to talk defense. He's waiting for you guys over there. So I think we've already run over a little bit. Let's let you guys get your shine on.
Gotcha. Well, I will give the shout out. The frame it's real quick. If you want to know who the names were, Sneaker number 1, Sneeko, Nico, the Freako, Collins, Jordan Addison, and Michael Pittman Jr. Hit over to the guys at Drew 3MR at our Manual Sports and hit up the DMs, and they will share their reasons for why they're framing up those two particular, and Chris Battistell, of course, if his wife, not if his wife lets him. That's not what I was going to say. But if not, that's, but if he has time at some point between now and then and wants to answer that, go for it. But spend time with your lovely wife. Happy birthday again. Guys, it's been a blast. Thank you for letting me jump onto, your show.
Oh my God. Thank you for doing it, man.
Yeah, you're the man.
So we'll see. We'll see how the voice holds up, because coming up next is Shoot the Gap, starring Hollywood Titan and myself. And don't forget to tune in this Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. God's time, to 11 Central, 12 Eastern. If that's not confusing, just keep watching. It's going to go till whenever it goes. And if we have any of you two long-winded fools on, it's going to go on forever. So for Rhett and Drew, I'm Nate. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time.